Hi, friends and family,
Welcome to Hope After Addiction
with your hosts, Katie Comer.
and Chelsea McLeod. Hey, friends, we're so glad you're with us today.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm doing really good. I'm excited about today.
I know. We have
Yay.
a super special guest named Candace.
Hi, Candace.
Hi. Yeah, she is so precious and dear and just has a really special story. So she's joining us today to just share some of her wisdom and knowledge and just words that God has given her walking through this. So thank you for being here today. We're super excited
Yes, very
to
excited.
have
Thank
you.
you all so much for having me. I am so honored.
Oh, well, thank you. So let's start. Just tell us a little bit about your story, yours and Kenna's, and just dynamics, and just tell us whatever's on your heart. And then we've got some questions,
Yep.
and we'll
Good
ask
questions.
those. Yeah.
Okay, so sorry. I am more emotional doing this than I anticipated I would be. Uh I have we have a long story together, my husband and I. My husband went through S2L last year. He went in April as my ex-husband. Um We have two children together. We have a 6-year-old and 11-year-old, and we got divorced in 2021. We finalized our divorce, and due to just a hard road with addiction, um, and he went to S2L last year, which has forever altered our lives, and ultimately brought redemption and restoration into our marriage, to where he was there for 9 months, and he left in January, the first part of January of last year, and we got remarried the day before we came home together, after 2 years of being on paper divorced and no longer together. And so,
Wow.
and now here I am.
Wow.
Whew.
God's story.
Goose.
Here to share some of that.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest things I love about their story is
Yeah.
just redemption. Like
Yeah.
when you say the word redemption, I mean, that is what is stamped all over your family, your marriage, the generations is that. So super special. And it's okay to be emotional. We talk about that a lot. Don't ever.
Oh, yeah.
It is okay. It's emotional stuff
There's
to talk
been
about.
many of tears.
Yeah.
Before the podcast, after the podcast, during the podcast.
Yes.
It's fine.
Yep. Happy
Yeah.
tears.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. So what did moving forward look like after your husband got home from S2L?
Moving forward, when Kenna came home from S2L was it was a massive transition for us. Like I said, we had been divorced for 2 years when Kenna entered into S2L, and we had not lived together in that time. We and we had years and years. We got married in 2013. And so up until 2021, I mean, we had a very long history of in and out of treatment centers, secular rehabs. I can't tell you how many, because it was so many. There was a year and a half period where I felt like every other month Kenna was coming home from treatment. And so we had just done this on paper, right, so many times. But hindsight, to what last year looked like for us, him coming out of S2L, is that he was in S2L for 9 months, and it felt like the slowest year. But it was now looking back, such a sweet time, because we had so much time. We had this time to build apart, to come back together, to where when he did come home, there was a sense of ease in that. But again, massive transitional period, because we had to learn how to be together again, as a couple, and in such a new way of life that we had learned. We had to learn how to parent together again. we had to learn, I mean, we had to learn how to grocery shop together again. And I know that sounds so ridiculous, but we had built different lives, so it was like we were learning how to do all of that together, really probably for the first time, because we were truly doing it together this time versus, in our marriage previously. I mean, we were two different entities living in a home together, to where we had had that time, that 9-month period apart, to really learn like what it meant to be married truly, um, and for each other. So, I mean, it's just such a transition, and it's been, he's been home for almost 10 months, and there are really hard days still, and there will continue to be, but then there's been so much goodness in it.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next question. How has it been to learn? Because one of the biggest things that we hear is how has it been to learn to trust again? And what's that process been like? Okay, he's home now, but how do you trust him in this new life that God's created him in? How did you learn to trust that?
Yeah, absolutely. That is such a hard thing, especially because um, so much trust was broken.
Yeah.
Um, but I really do. I revert back to that 9-month period, where I got the opportunity when Kenna decided to intern there for that 6-month period after completing the 84 days. Um, I got the opportunity to slowly see the change in him, to see what Christ had done in his life, and just more of our backstories. Kenna got saved at S2L in April, and I got saved while Kenna was at S2L
That's wonderful.
last September. And so
It's beautiful.
um, we got this opportunity to see the change in each other, because there was a change in me too. There was a change in my heart, and there was a change in his heart, and to slowly build that trust back, and see the differences in him, um, and watch him walk in obedience there, and us walked in obedience together here, because he would come home, during that slow build. He would come home. We would get 4, 5, 6 days together, every couple of weeks. And I mean, I feel like it's such an important part of our story, and like, don't even know if it's appropriate to share, but I think it is. Like, during that 9-month span of him coming home, like, I mean, we didn't sleep together, and I say that to say, we have 2 children together. We were married, but we weren't married. We were divorced, and, like, build that intimacy, right? Like, true intimacy together, and, like, that built so much trust for us, Lust and those things plagued our marriage, pornography, lust, all of those things, like, plagued our marriage, and, like, that was a massive trust builder for us, is that we took it slow. We were like, we're going to do this differently. We're going to walk in obedience with the Lord. What is the Lord calling us to do? To where when he did come home, we had like a foundation of trust already built, over that time. And when he did get, and I mean, not to say at all that like it was like wiped clean, like, oh my gosh, like we trust each other so immensely. We still struggle, those things will come up. We get triggered, both of us, with each other. Um, but to have built that foundation before he came home, during that time, and then to have it once we came home, where when the little things would pop up, we had that intimacy and we could talk about it.
Yeah.
Hey, like my mind is going off in this different direction. You just moved in a way that triggered a memory in my head, from 6 years ago, and I can't shake it, and to be able to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Holy Spirit prompted you to talk about, I think that kind of came up to your brain about the intimacy and pornography. And that's something actually mentioned in my girls group. Actually, you were there with me because so many of our relationships are plagued with lust and with all of that stuff. And so I thank you for bringing that up because I know that was a big part of our story. And it's funny that I had a client I was talking to this week because John and I chose that same walk. And I was talking to a client years ago and she said, you can't take that back. And I said, yes, we can. Like what the Lord chooses to wipe clean after we become new, we can, and thank you for talking about that because I can almost bet that probably 90% of the women going through this have dealt with that same thing. And just that was a Holy Spirit led thing that you just said. So thank you.
Yes.
Next question. What does forgiveness mean to you through this journey?
It's funny when you asked me to come on, I had no idea what this would look like, but it immediately, I felt it on my heart that I hoped that we would talk about forgiveness,
True.
because it is the biggest part of why I'm sitting here right now. It is my story. It is our story. And we both got saved last year.
Yeah.
And just like the final clickage in our lives, of understanding our own forgiveness individually, like that I am forgiven, truly wiped clean, a new creation, that my husband is forgiven. And like we have done rehab, secular treatment so many times. I mean, I could run one. So many family programs, so many things. And it was like that last year in all of this, the missing piece, you know, the missing piece in both of our lives of understanding our own forgiveness and then being able to forgive each other, right? Because we had made decisions. We had made the decision to not forgive each other. You know, I had made a decision to not forgive him for the past, all of the pain, all of the hurt, all of the anger. He had made a decision to not forgive me for my anger, for walking away, all of that. Like, we made a decision, like, we're not going to forgive each other. We would rather, like, live in that pride, live in that anger, live in that hate for each other than forgive each other. And then through each of our individual salvations, I mean, coming together, and me being able to see Kenna as a new creation, see Kenna forgiven, see past the hurt that I felt and understand what the hurt he was feeling, what was going on in his life, what the enemy was doing in his head, what the enemy was doing to separate us, that like there was a power, spiritual warfare that did not want us to be together, that did not want our family to do what our family is called to do, and be able to walk into that forgiveness and put it down. And this is something that, and in the past 10 months that Kenna has been home, Kenna is so like the change, we talk about the change like in our husbands. Kenna is so much better at this than I am. Little argument, big argument. But looking at me and saying, I love you so much more than this feeling I'm having right now, than this argument, than what I'm mad about.
That's good.
And I mean, like, that's what it's about, right? Like we can get angry at each other, we can pick up our pride, but like that forgiveness, like just seeing it for what it is, like, I don't want to not be with you. I don't want to not do this life with you.
Yeah.
I love you more than this feeling.
That's
And
beautiful.
walking into that and not walking into our anger. And then honestly, for me, the third tier of forgiveness is I finally was able to, and it feels so weird for me to say it, but it's the truth, is I was able to forgive God. because I had, oh, y'all, I mean, for the 2 years during my divorce, I mean, I grew up in addiction. I grew up in addiction, just, a series of unfortunate events in my life that, especially by the time we got divorced and everything just spiraled, I had such a resentment with God. Why? Why is this my life? You know, why is this my life? I feel like I'm X, Y, and Z. And just, I mean, such a resentment with Him.
Yeah.
And being able to put that down and be like, okay, I see you. I see you. I'm sorry.
It's
And like,
beautiful.
I'm not angry because there was a purpose.
Ooh, girl.
I know.
Man, it's powerful.
I know. It's beautiful. I didn't know the in-depth part of your story. And so I'm kind of finding this out along with the listeners as well. I knew of you, but I am just so happy that you're on this podcast because you're going to reach so many. It's just so beautiful. One of the parts of your story is that you have children.
Yeah.
And that's something I did not have when Adam was going through his addiction and finding the Lord. So I didn't have that next layer, if you will, of complications. So tell us a little bit about how your husband's addiction affected your children. And what advice would you give other parents that are walking in this with their children and their families? What advice would you give them to get them through this part of their life?
Yes. So we have an 11-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. Um, and our daughter uh, was in kindergarten. She was 6 when, like, I used to refer to it as the relapse that never ended. And it was 5 years ago. It was right 5, 6 years ago, right around the time our son was born. And so her life, up until that point, kind of had been in and out in treatment centers, but they had, we could get 6, 8 months, a year, without him going back. We would get like these sort of longer, not long by any means, but longer stints of him with normalcy, if you will. And by the time our son was born, it was just full fledged in and out and in and out and in and out. And so our son was a baby, but our daughter, she was 6, and it definitely had an effect on her. Um, and one of the biggest effects, I would say, would be time. Um, and just the time of just that lapse in time being gone. There was so much time that he was gone, and like this lack of security from it, um, that created, and just this unknown, right? This constant unknown. And then too, with me, it created this sense of like, can't let me go, because I was that security. Um, so this like almost unhealthy attachment to me, just massive detachment from that and the situation, with him. But I listened. I think it was a sermon I listened to, and it's like I keep hearing it in my head right now. Um, a few months ago, and it was, what they were saying was your inability to put down your insecurity. Speaking to a mother, your daughter's going to pick that up. Um, your inability to put down addiction. So they were speaking to a father in this. Your son's going to pick that up and carry it. Um, and that spoke so much to me, And leads into like my biggest advice with it is honesty with
Yeah.
your kids. And there's a balance with that, and we have had to learn it, right? We have made mistakes in honesty, and then there's things that I have no regrets about in honesty. Um, and the honesty of where I was going with the security in the addiction is, and not passing that on for our kids to carry, because the insecurity spoke so much to me of like having to come back and say to my daughter in times in the past of like, hey, like I was super, I wasn't secure in this, I was lost, and I'm sorry. And even Kenna's ability now to say to our children openly, because there's a level of honesty, there's an appropriate level of honesty with addiction with our kids of, I did this and I'm sorry and I was wrong. And this is, and explaining that. And then, too, um, again, just full transparency on our lives of we walked through a relapse this summer. Um, since Kenna has been home, we walked through a relapse, and our children watched their dad leave for a very brief amount of time. And our 11-year-old daughter, because of honesty and her knowing, could get down on her knees and pray for her daddy,
True.
and the power of that little girl's prayer, and that she knew um, that he was protected, that the Lord was protecting our family in that, I say that to say, like, Ken and I both grew up in homes with addiction. And so like we have brought to the table how he grew up with it, how I grew up with it, and like meeting that in the middle of how do we want our kids to be able to cope and walk through this. And I want my children to be able to cope and walk through this with the Lord behind them, that they know that no matter what season they're in, whether it's bad or good, that he is with them. And so
That's wonderful.
True.
And when you say appropriate, you mean like age appropriate talk?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because with our, with our daughter, she's older. She's in middle school this
Sure.
year. We have a 6-year-old son
Yeah. There's
who,
differences.
who is just less like fluent.
Sure. Yeah. Which makes total sense.
Yeah,
Because we get
for
that
sure.
too a lot. We're like, which we haven't really brought up Adam's past to our kids, but they know that daddy helps people. But I'm always picking mom brains and like, when do you start talking about this? And everybody that I've talked to said it needs to be, like you said, honesty, but age appropriate honesty. And
Right.
I love the fact that you said, because of your honesty, that's so powerful that your daughter was able to get on her knees and pray to her for her daddy. And
True.
you want that as a mom and a dad, that they go before the Lord and surrender, because that's what we've done, and we want to teach them that.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. For
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
And if nobody's told you, and I will get emotional, you're an amazing mom.
Yes.
And you have amazing kids. And her kids are special.
Aw.
Like, to think about all you guys have walked through
Yeah.
and the ways that y'all have parented and come through this, it is incredible. I mean, we've had some sweet time with them, and they're just such
Aw.
cool kids. And so I applaud you for that, because it's a special thing. And I can't imagine seeing my daughter on the floor praying, just
know.
how powerful that must have been for your own faith too.
Yeah.
So, okay, last question. What would you say is the greatest lesson that you learned from walking through this with your husband?
The greatest lesson that I have learned is I'm gonna verse it on that, and then I'll explain why, is just the truth in Jeremiah 29:11 through 13. and it's funny, our children go to a Christian school, and our daughter has a memory verse every week. And at the end of this past school year, that was one of her memory verses. And we have made it a thing to when we're studying it with her, like, I'm going to memorize these verses, and I'm not great at it. I don't know how she does it. But that is one that I had no trouble with, and that God truly has a plan,
It does.
and that it is not to harm us. That He's with us and He hears us, and that we're seeking Him. When we're seeking Him, He is right there. And I think back to 6 years ago, I had a newborn baby, a 6-year-old little girl, in a house that we ultimately lost. That I thought was our end all house. Our kids were gonna, our kids were gonna graduate high school in, and but I think back to that young woman in that house with the baby and that little girl, and not knowing, just knowing that my husband was going to die. 100%. I was waiting. Not for him to come home, not for him to get better. I was waiting for him to die every time my phone rang. And then just the next couple of years of finalizing my divorce, and like signing those papers, and just I remember thinking, like, wow, like I am a single mom now of 2 kids, and my kids are growing up in the exact same dysfunction that I am. And, just how am I here, to right now in this moment?
Wow.
Like, God has a plan.
He does.
And I could never have imagined that we would be where we are, that my family would be restored to what it is now. And that this past weekend, September 21st, we would have been married. We got married in Boone, North Carolina, 10 years ago, September 21st. And this past weekend, we were in Boone on what would have been our 10th wedding anniversary, with friends who are our family, a brother of Kenneth's from S2L. And I stood on a riverbank holding one of their daughters in my arm as I watched my husband baptize his brother in the river.
Wow.
And this morning, before I did this call, I'm on a group chat with 16 women who are double my age, if not more, that I'm in the sweetest Bible study with. And I asked them for prayer for this to just be with me, because I was so nervous.
No.
And each of them sent me back the sweetest message. I called a woman on my way home to do this who prayed with me over the phone. And to know that my life is where it is right now. And there are hard days. I mean, we still fight, blow up, showdown, fights. But we have something in our lives that we didn't have before that brings it all together. And that's Christ.
That's right.
And the wholeness that we can individually have in that, and then bring into our marriage. And I think about that girl 6 years ago that was like, that wanted to just didn't want to do anything anymore. And I'm like, okay, I get it.
Wow.
I get it.
Whew. But
Girl,
God.
but God.
Yeah.
You are preaching, and it is so good, and you are so special, and Kenna is so special. We love you guys. We are so proud of you. Watching y'all two walk this together, and just what God's done, and oh my goodness.
It's a beautiful story. It's just the restoration.
Yeah.
We love that word.
I know. It's
We were
so
at that
special.
benefit concert a few weeks ago now, and just seeing all of the relationships that have been restored.
True.
It was just like a walking restoration. It was just so beautiful. And so, goodness, I thank you so much for sharing your story. Your story, I know that people are going to get on here and in that desperation of just needing something, and some of your words are going to impact them so much just to keep going, and that God has a plan no matter what they're going through.
Yes.
And so I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it's not easy. I get it. But you did wonderful. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, you were a gift.
you.
Yeah. I mean, I just can't say that enough.
Yeah. Well, we're going to let you go, but thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all for listening today. We are so thankful that we have you all as listeners. If you have any questions for Candace, please reach out to us, and we'll make sure we get those questions to her so she can answer them for you. If there's any topics that you want us to discuss, we're on socials. We're at Hope After Addiction on Facebook and on Instagram. Message us. We'd love to answer those questions for you. It also creates some topics that we like to do during our podcasts. If you're listening on YouTube, just give us a subscribe and just chat with us. We'd love to chat with you. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. Candace, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you all are blessed and have a great day.